Okay, I'm gonna do a portrait demo. I will do this in real time in the beginning, and then we'll go to a time lapse for some of the painting sections. But I do want to talk about the choices I'm making as I'm starting to draw the portrait out on the canvas. I'm drawing this out in vine charcoal, and I'm using vine charcoal because it will just integrate into the oil paint. It's not going to act like graphite, where graphite will rise through the layers of oil paint, and that can be really distracting visually. Vine charcoal has a very low kind of tinting capacity, so it's not going to really affect your paint. It's just going to kind of meld into your paint, and it's easy to just wipe off. So it's a very nice medium to use in the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to start to draw this portrait. And I'm thinking, first I'm identifying the kind of direction of the head. So you can think of the direction of the head and the shoulders. What are the overall shapes that I'm seeing? So I'm putting in some kind of general lines for hair, for example, and the head is at a tilt. So those are things I want to identify right away. So you're thinking first of this big general information. You're not getting into any kind of detail. Okay, so, and then the shoulders are coming over this way. Okay, and the shirt is going to go down like that. So I'm keeping it general, and I'm kind of organizing the space. Think of how I want things placed. So the head's going to be coming through here, shoulders will be coming through here. I can already see him building some diagonals into my composition, which is something I want because I want the eye moving all around. Okay, and if you can work in your portrait, if you can have a portrait that has like a bit of a diagonal, for example, rather than just straight up and down, that can be really interesting. So it's something for you to consider. Okay, I'm gonna start to think of the shapes that I'm seeing in the face. You're always kind of breaking things down into the simplest shapes possible. Okay, so I'm thinking of how the head can be acting like a sphere. And you can also be thinking of the kind of hybrid shapes that you're seeing, right? So parts of the jaw are going to be a little bit rectangular, parts of it are going to be more kind of like a cone. Of course, the neck is sort of acting like a cylinder a bit. And I'm putting things down and kind of assessing how they look. And this is a stage where a lot can be moving around, right? You're sort of observing your subject, making notes on your canvas, and seeing what the placement looks like. But again, you're not getting super specific yet, because things may change. We have to sort of gradually build up to becoming more and more specific. But right now I'm thinking of general placement and big shapes. Okay, and I'm making sure that the head is fitting within the frame, that it's not awkwardly right up at the top or meeting the top here. So I'm liking the placement and the space. Okay, I like that the shoulders also have this, there's a sloping diagonal built into that, built into the pose. Okay, there's also this. Okay. Okay. Okay, and take your time in this stage. Sometimes we want to rush into detail and we end up with some bigger problems, like making the head way too large, or just not paying attention to those larger structural issues. So take your time. Okay, so big general shapes, thinking of those big shapes in the head. And now I'm also going to start to think of the proportions in the face, right? So there's the kind of brow line, and I'm also observing that, so the head is tilting, and I'm putting in the proportions, and they're also all, the features of the face are running along this kind of slope, and they are parallel to each other, right? So don't try to sort of straighten out the features. Remember that there's that slope, and that's going to affect the placement of everything. Okay, so I'm mapping out the kind of general proportions of the face. So we're going to think of those proportion studies we did from the figure drawing text, putting in the keystone. And you can always keep the general proportions in mind, but then also really observe your drawing subject too, because your drawing subject, your portrait, might have deviations from those proportions, and that can be part of how you capture likeness, is the subtle ways that someone can be different, right? So I'm thinking of that sphere and the nose. There's also these planes to the nose. I'm going to put in a general placement for where the eyes are going to go. Okay. And then you can also be thinking, okay, if I run a line from the edge of the eye, what does that intersect with on the face, right? So run those plumb lines, check what parts of the face are lining up with other parts of the face or the body. That's also going to really help you to capture likeness. And if you want to exaggerate things, you can, but you want that to be a conscious decision where you still have observed what's going on in your subject, and you're making a choice to do something else, which can be really interesting. Okay, so getting in the eyes, and I'm remembering that the eyes are acting like spheres, right? That they're set into the head, and they're spheres with the eyelids wrapping around them. So that determines what the shape is like and how that form reads. Okay, checking where the edge of the lip is going to line up about right there. Okay, also the edge of the chin. Again, you're gradually working on up to more and more specific details, but you're not drawing the eye first. You have to place everything first and gradually work your way there. Also, just so that you don't waste your time, so you don't start painting on something, you get 50% of the way through and realize you've made a very awkward compositional choice. So we want to try to establish these strategic working habits. Okay, so I'm going to continue refining this drawing, get it ready for the painting. I'll now transition to time lapse and I'll continue narrating over the top of that. I'm making sure I like the placement of all the major things in my composition in my drawing layer. I'm mapping out the major planes of the face and where the shadows will go. I'm keeping the proportions of the face in mind. The goal is to solidify your composition in the drawing layer. Paint won't magically fix a composition that isn't working. Take the time in your drawing to address compositional concerns and don't rush to painting before you are prepared. This is especially important when painting a portrait. Give yourself a solid foundation to work with and paint on top of. Work strategically. Work from big general shapes, establish the shadow mass, and slowly build up into detail. Work from dark to light. Make sure you have captured the shape of your shadows before adding in light layers. In the background behind the shadow side of the portrait, I am popping in light. On the light side of the portrait, I'm making the background a little darker. Many portrait painters will decide to do this in their paintings. You can see it in many of Rembrandt's works. The light behind the dark side helps the portrait to pop out, and the dark behind the light side also helps that light side to pop out. The background and the context around the portrait will also affect how the portrait itself reads. Once I have established all of the major values in my portrait, I begin to revisit my shadows and look for shadows that need more emphasis. I'm continually squinting at my painting to gauge the value structure. Squint at your reference, then squint at your painting. Is the value structure clear? Make sure to pay attention to your edges as you go as well. You can see that as I am working, I am blending edges together to create soft forms. Areas of intense highlight can be brighter and sharper. Soften areas that you want to recede. I softened the entire shirt, for example, because I didn't want it to be a focus. As you're finishing the portrait, you can pop in areas of intense highlight with brighter and thicker paint. Be conservative with your highlights. You only want this in the truly lightest sections. What we have created for this project is a grisaille, or a painting in grayscale. Working in a grisaille allows us to establish a sound value structure, and then we can later glaze color on top.